Previously on X-Men.
Funny story is that me and my friend Gabe were talking on my radio show, and he mentions, oh yeah, well, X-Men was recorded in Canada. And I'm like, it was? And it's like by Canadian actors. They were? And then someone shined a light on this book previously on X-Men, and my head exploded, and I said, I need to buy this book now. And it's in the mail, coming from Amazon.com, and I am so thrilled to be talking with Eric and Julia Lewald.
Did you grow up in Canada? Were you alive in the 90s? Did you love YTV? Yeah, you did.
Well, I can't even say. You guys did so much on this show. What is your official titles? Are you the creators of the show? Are you the showrunners? Like the writers? You did so much.
I'm going to jump in first.
Cool.
Julia Lewald here.
Yeah.
And I got to be a writer on X-Men the Animated Series, a TV animation writer. Worked on a lot of other things, but got to specifically be a writer, got to pitch stories for X-Men, and got to be a fly on the wall for the whole 5 years run, which was fabulous fun.
And I was the showrunner, so I had can't draw at all.
No.
So that's a bunch of other people. But from like the first day till the last day, all the writing, all the stories, all the scripts, all that was on me. So good, bad, indifferent.
Yeah.
For 5 years, it was my gig, and it was the best job I ever had.
Well, a lot of shows, a lot can be said about the animation, which was very almost from the pages of Jim Lee's comic run from the time. But the writing of the show is what everyone remembers. In the first episode, you killed a character and incarcerated a character.
Yeah.
You know,
for doing heroic things. You know.
It was great that we were able to do this. Obviously, most of these kid shows are written by adults, and 9 times out of 10, we don't get a chance to make the stories as intense and dramatic as we want to. And this time, the people at Fox, who were this little bitty half network, looked at us and said, "We're hiring you to push this as far as you want to push this and make it and write it for yourselves. Don't worry about." Upsetting people. I mean, obviously there are limits. There are rules we have to deal with in kids programming, but we pushed all of them, and we asked about all of them. We told them right away, look, if the X-Men are going to be these 30-ish-year-old people with superpowers fighting even more powerful people, and cities and countries and planets are at stake, we can't have it be patty cake. We want there to be consequences. And so we need to kill somebody in the first story. And not just a random bystander, but the most beloved character we can write. And we want him to be killed in the first story so everybody understands that there's a price to being an X-Men.
And we had met each other working at Disney Afternoon on the Disney TV shows, Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers, Goof Troop, Winnie the Pooh, and all those shows. And then when you said with Mark Edens and Michael Edens, the 3 writers, the 3 of you coming together to sort of put out would be the first 13 episodes. And assuming it would be the only 13 episodes, no one knew it would go any further than that. You guys were adamant. We have to tell heroic stories, and the way to do it. And I said, well, good luck getting that past broadcast standards and practices.
But they were very, very thoughtful people. We had the greatest censor on the planet, named Avery Coburn, and she liked the comic books, which were pretty intense in the 90s, and she liked good adult storytelling, and so she let us push it a lot further than normally would have happened. And as she was saying, the guys that helped me lay out the first couple seasons were writing buddies of mine from the University of Tennessee, and we met programming movies. We liked they were historical movies, war movies, westerns, adult dramas. We didn't come out here, to write Strawberry Shortcake, although I have written the Strawberry Shortcake.
Yes.
And so we said, let us treat the X-Men seriously, and said, do it, run with it. And it was the greatest opportunity we ever had.
That's amazing. Okay, so what's really interesting about this show is that a few years earlier, there was this pilot called Pride of the X-Men, where Wolverine was Australian for some reason, and it had a very different group of X-Men. I believe Nightcrawler was on the team. And how did you go about picking who was going to be the X-Men in this series?
The folks who had created Pride of the X-Men were basically the same team
on the art side.
Yeah, at Marvel Productions at the time, that then moved over to Fox Kids. Margaret Lesh, who was the brains behind all this, was at Marvel herself, had been trying to get an X-Men show off the air for years. Then she became the president of Fox Kids and was like, we're going to do this. But back in the late 80s, when they were all at Marvel trying to make a show, she was keen to get a show done.
Yeah. See, this is so weird with everybody thinking back. I mean, from your generation looking back in the 80s, for almost the entire 80s, this woman was working at Marvel Productions, trying to get a Marvel anything on the air.
On the air.
And all the TV people in Hollywood were saying, nah, it'll never work. It's too small an audience. It won't translate into TV. They've tried before. The Marvel shows don't. Stop bothering me.
No one knows who they are.
Nobody would put a Marvel show on. She got all sorts of wonderful shows on when she was working at Marvel Productions, but none of them were Marvel proper. They're things like Muppet Babies and Transformers, and I mean things that we remember, but not. She couldn't sell a Marvel show to save her life, and X-Men she thought would be the best Marvel show. So as soon as she got this new job in 1990 as head of Fox Kids Networks, he said, I want to put the X-Men on. And even her boss then said, no, I don't get it. It's somber, it's serious, it's adult.
No one knows who they are.
Yeah. And she said, look, my job's on the line. If the show doesn't work, you can fire me. So she pushed it and pushed it and pushed it. She got on the air. And luckily, she and her number one assistant, Sidney Iwander, who was this strange man, who he was the hands-on guy. He was the guy in the field. He read every word we ever wrote. He looked at every drawing of the X-Men and Batman and Spider-Man and the Tick. And, he was her, he was 24 hours a day making sure everything was the way it should be for us. Luckily, I'd worked with them on a season of Beetlejuice. I'd run a season of Beetlejuice before that.
As a showrunner.
And it was dumb luck. And so when they're looking around for somebody to be in charge of the scripts, I said, well, we maybe know 4 or 5 people, but Eric fits best. And that's all I could figure because I really didn't know the books. And I'm there, the morning that the night before we're going to meet everybody, Stan Lee and James Bond and all the 30 production people we're going ahead and doing the show. And I got a call saying, we need you to show run the X-Men. I said, well, can you tell me who they are? And it was, there was no web, so I couldn't Google. And I had to go to get my friends, comic collections and, figure out what's on. But it was, it was a great deal.
But so it's taking a step back to why Pride of the X-Men happened the way it did.
Oh, right, yeah. Margaret stole money. She was working on an older RoboCop series, and she took the money that was supposed to go for the last episode of that, and she said, I'm going to make a pilot episode of the X-Men to show the networks how wonderful it can be. And so she got Marvel's blessing on that. She took the money. She made this, and it flopped. And everything was wrong. Wolverine was Australian. They put 5 times too much story into it and too many characters. Maybe they wanted it too much. Whatever it was, it didn't work and just died.
Well, and part of that issue was the same creative team, Margaret Lesh and Will Mineo, who went on to be X-Men the Animated Series producer, director.
Supervisor producer. And
Larry Houston. Who all moved on to the
So all these
project.
good, talented people were there, and they went through it once, and they saw it fail, and they knew why it failed, and they knew that, like, these people, like Julia's saying, why was he Australian?
Hold it! The kid stays here. She'll just get in the way.
Because at the time, the people above them who could make these final decisions at Marvel at the time, hey, there's a movie out called Crocodile Dundee. He's Australian. Kids like that. Let's make Wolverine Australian. No one's going to care. That was the kind of decision making that was hitting them when they were trying to get Pride of the X-Men made.
Right. And so when we got to do our show, these guys who absolutely loved and respected the X-Men had been through about 10 years of that kind of decisions made on top of them, and they just said, no more. When we had about a dozen crises like that would come up when somebody with some money or some influence or some leverage would say, let's change it and make the show very different from what you're doing right now. And everybody to a man just said, or woman said, no way. If you want me to keep on working, we're not changing this. You can fire me, but I'm not going to make it stupid. And that's not what you usually do when you're in your 30s and you've got kids and a mortgage and rent. You don't usually make those kind of stands. But everybody was ready to do it and got each other's backs on it.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a say in who was going to be on the team at all?
Oh, yeah. Everybody had an interest. Marvel had people that were new, like Jubilee and Gambit were new, and so they were up on them. Fox had an interest. And it's interesting when you read the book.
I will Monday. It's coming. It's already in the mail.
So there were 5 or 6 characters people agreed on, but believe it or not, of those, Beast and Jean Grey were not among them. If you look at there's a promotional picture.
Put this up there. Yeah, this was one of the very first posters, and you'll notice there is no Jean Grey. There is no Gambit. There's no Gambit. There's no Beast. And no Morph. And so what we were doing is the writer Mark Edens and I were on our dining room table. We're trying to lay out the first 13 stories. And the more we wrote, the more we just, this Beast guy is wonderful. We put him in jail because we were told he just needs to be a guest. And, get him in an episode or 2, put him in jail, and maybe we'll see him at the end of the season. But he's not a main character. Jean's not a main character. As we were writing, both of those characters kind of made themselves indispensable. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful to write for Beast. He's the only person that can talk and say and believe and feel certain things that he does, nobody else on the team.
Perhaps you self-appointed social engineers don't realize the crucial role mutation plays in species evolution. Get him!
He's the most comfortable with and he's got the most obvious.
And Jean Grey fit with everybody in a weird way that nobody else did. It's like she could talk to everybody in a way that nobody else could. So the more we were writing the stories, the more we kept on putting these supposed guest secondary characters in. And by the end of the first season, they had asserted themselves and become regulars. And evidently, I understand that happens a lot in Hollywood, more on live action shows where you'll have a guest character in episode 2 and everybody loves them. Mm-hmm. And then they start bringing him back, but before people know it, he's a regular. Well, that happened with Beast and Jean.
And not only Beast and Jean, but I'm looking in the book here. Professor X was
thought of as secondary.
He was going to be secondary as well.
So at that big meeting, we thought, okay, it's got to be Cyclops and Wolverine, and we need a teenager. So Jubilee, it could have been Kitty Pryde, but she was in the thing that didn't work. So let's pick Jubilee. She's new. And so they picked 5 or 6 and said, okay, we agree on these. And then as we wrote, these other people made themselves indispensable.
That's it. That's really amazing that you're saying all this now, because I'm trying to imagine this series, especially later on with the Dark Phoenix saga, how it would not have worked without Jean. In fact, Jean, one could say, was part of Wolverine's soul.
Right.
Yeah.
You tell those stories without her.
Yeah.
In fact, again, just on the book right here, page 28, an early memo, she's even listed as an other. She's not team A, she's not team B. She's other. That because she just wasn't perceived as being that necessary yet. That shows you how these things are organic. They can actually grow as you work on them.
And the creative process. And really the weird part, again, thinking back to the fact that Marvel had no credence. They were small. I'm small. They were a comic book company. They didn't have any production arms. There were no movies at the time.
Right.
They were headed for bankruptcy.
And they hit.
And they hit it like in the middle of our show. And when we were hired to do this, none of the creative people, we were only given a 1-season contract. So as soon as we finished the first 13 scripts and the guys finished drawing the first 13 storyboards, they let us all go. And they just thought, well, it'll play once, it'll be gone. Let's forget about it. Let's look at the next show. And so, okay, then it becomes a hit, and they had to crawl back and come on. And you'd think they would have given us a lot more money. Of course, they didn't. But we did come back, most of us. Some of them couldn't. Some people were committed to other jobs. So, but that just showed how little expectations were at the time.
Okay, so X-Men is definitely one of the first American series. I know anime does this sometimes too, where they have 4 or 5 episodes that kind of all go into another, but you guys did a lot of part 1s and part 2s. You did a lot of part 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5s. Like, you were the first show to do this. Was that a conscious decision when it was happening, or did you say, I don't think we're done this story yet. Let's make another episode.
Actually,
very conscious.
You guys sitting down at first, and again with the blessings of Fox and Marvel, looking at those first 13 episodes, saying, "Okay, these are the only 13 episodes we're ever going to get to do with these characters. What are the 13 we need to tell?" And then once the second season was written out, was sent to go, that's when you guys were able to sort of do more 1 and 2-parters rather than 4 or 5-parters.
All the people on the artist side and the writers, of course, agree. It's so much more satisfying writing something that builds and builds and builds and connects. It's great for us. We're not usually allowed to do it in animation because they say, well, animation comes back, it's not right, and if episode 3 isn't ready, you can show 1 and 2, but then you can't show 4.
Because you got to show 3 first.
It's easier with live action because you know if something fails one day, you can like fix it the next day. It's only your day out. If the animation comes back after 3 months of work and it all sucks, which happened, which is a reason we premiered in January instead of September because the early animation wasn't right yet. Networks don't want to delay for 3 or 4 months before they premiere a show. So that's a major reason they don't let us do connected episodes. I know they do it. Anime. We liked anime. The artist people liked anime. So there was a reference there. But I think the main thing that made the art people want to do it was that's the way comic books are.
Right.
The really good comic books. You go for 18 months, or 8 issues or whatever. You go 6 or 7 issues to play a story out. We want to do that with the X-Men, and they really didn't want to do it. And we then. An editor said, well, we can do it like they do on Hill Street Blues, previously on X-Men.
Previously on X-Men.
And that's where the recap thing came out. And that's why the book's called that. And that made them feel a little better. And she also said, well, that's 15 seconds of animation you don't have to pay for.
Because I will be cut from what's already there. A gal named Sharon Janis, and we all owe her a debt for that. Because
she cut those really nicely. And she'd done those for years, and she knew how.
But that was another thing in the world of kids animation. A lot of people were saying, kids can't follow. Kids aren't going to remember. You're going to confuse people. You cannot tell those kinds of stories in this kind of format. Yeah. And it was a lot of you guys pushing back the whole way to get that done.
Yeah.
And then in the second season, rather than do 4 and 5-parters, you came up with the idea of threading in the Savage Land throughout the whole season.
Yeah. So they told us, you can't do 13 connected. Okay, so we'll do a 2-parter and then lose Xavier and Magneto for 9 episodes, have this little 1-minute thing. And they said, look, write that thing out first. We can get that animated first. We don't worry about it. And we can tack that in as we go. And then have the last 2 episodes of the season be a 2-parter that resolves it. So in effect, it's 13 connected, but it let them have those 9 in the middle kind of interchangeable. We could have moved a couple of those around if one wasn't looking good, and that made them feel better. That's why we did the little 1-minute thing. We also thought it would be very cool to see what would happen if Xavier were gone, how the X-Men would handle that.
Seeing Rogue's vulnerability, where you realize without Professor Xavier being her mentor, helping her. Oh my God, seriously? I guess no one realized how popular Captain Marvel would be in 2018 because that scene where Rogue holding on to her is traumatizing. It is. It's super hardcore, especially the fact that for Rogue to keep living her life, she had to bury Carol down in her brain again.
If we didn't get you with the death of Morph, we're going to get you with that kind of traumatization. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. On the writing side of it, we were constantly told, do not write down. You do not write down to kids. You happen to be writing a half-hour animated program, but treat it like a 1-hour drama, live action.
Like you're writing a movie. And we all believe that. All the people, the creative team believe that any 8-year-old will watch something that his 13-year-old brother wants to watch, but the 13-year-old isn't going to watch something that's written only for an 8-year-old.
Yeah.
So why write young, write old? And man, they still don't get it out here. I mean, we still, if we got a job tomorrow, we'd walk into the office and they'd say, oh, well, our psychologists tell us that 8 to 11-year-olds won't understand this. And we just want to slug them and say, the X-Men did fine. Come on.
I'm sorry, gentlemen. Your anger at the inexorable alienation of late 20th century life is sadly misdirected.
All right, so 13 episodes happen, but the animation comes back, you're seeing what it's like, but when you first hear that voice cast of all those actors and it all comes together, tell me about that first time seeing and viewing. Like,
where's that blasted salami? I can smell it. Ah, all it needs is slicing.
Well, there are 2 stages to that.
Yeah. Can I? Yeah, you jump.
please.
2 things happened.
Okay.
Again, this is back in the 90s. This didn't exist.
Nope.
Couldn't call somebody like that. Couldn't go online. It was audio cassettes, and it was audio cassettes sent from LA,
From Toronto
to LA.
Yeah.
Listen, and so you wrote the sides, which is what bits of script that a voice talent would read and record, and then you got back the first set.
Right, and so we get back, and it's a good company. It's a good professional company in Toronto. They've done good work before.
They have good voice talent.
And we get back to stuff, and it's like it's Scooby-Doo Smurfs X-Men.
Get out.
They just weren't used to the idea of playing this stuff straight. And we just died. We just curled up in a corner and thought, we are so screwed. Our show's over. It's done. Destroyed. Mm-hmm. So Sidney Iwaner, the hands-on guy from Fox, and Larry Houston and a couple other people went up to Toronto and spent a couple weeks and just said, no, guys, this is like dramatic movies. This is, we'll pull in some new cast. And they went around to the Toronto theater world and got some really serious theater actors.
That was the big distinction.
And said, now play this stuff straight. And then we got tapes back, and they were wonderful. Mm-hmm. And we'd get like 4 people doing voices for a character and say, 3 of them were great. I almost don't know how they really got it. And there were 3 or 4 of the characters that were just right from the first day. And one of them was Wolverine, who had never done a show before. He was a singer, but he never, Cal told you. But he growled, and he was in.
What are we all waiting for? Invitations?
I got invitations right here. Enough for everybody.
And the other was Rogue, just said one line in her southern accent, and she was in. And that was after like 2 weeks. That's the very end of the casting. They looked at dozens of other people. I've got a quote from, if I can quote somebody else worked on the show, a guy named Bob Harris. He was the ex-editor. He was of all the X-Men books at the time.
In New York, right?
In New York, all the comic books. And he was our advisor. He helped us out with questions about stuff, if it fit or not, if it was right for the characters, if it was right for the world. And he was there during the recordings. And he said, man, I've been reading these books for 30 years. I've heard these characters in my head over and over and over all my life. And now I'm watching somebody, or I'm listening to somebody say Wolverine out loud, say Professor Xavier out loud. And he said it was the most surreal experience he ever had. For us, it was different. It was just like, oh, this is great. We'd imagine, we'd written a story, and this voice is perfect for it. And so it was very much kind of like fit what we'd imagined. But for Bob, it was an even bigger deal because he'd grown up with these characters, and now suddenly they were alive in front of him. Yeah. And that was very, very weird, he said.
You could definitely tell that, as you say, Bob was like a real fan, because within 5 years of the show, you managed to cover like 20 years of really big, important X-Men storylines, including, like I said before, the Dark Phoenix saga. And at the end of an episode, it comes up and it pans up to very early computer animated fire, and it says, coming soon, the Dark Phoenix saga. And you can tell that some adults by the time must have been watching the show and all crap their pants, because that was, even as an adult rewatching the series now, I'm like, oh no. Things are gonna get crazy.
Tomorrow brings you all new X-Men excitement.
The Earth has gone mad.
With the thrilling conclusion of the Phoenix Saga.
Soon the universe will tremble.
It's the final showdown. I got a real bad feeling. To save the galaxy.
That's at what cost?
Don't miss this action-packed X-Men event tomorrow afternoon on Fox Kids.
From a writing standpoint, how did you go picking these classic X-Men storylines? Because there's so many you could have picked from. How did you choose the ones you did?
Check out more episodes of You, Me, and YTV on Facebook and YouTube. Sweet one-of-a-kind interviews with PJ Freshfield, PJ Paul, Tarzan Dan, the cast of Student Bodies, the voice acting cast of Sailor Moon, and much, much more. exclusively on You, Me, and YTV. Season 2.